The gens Portia, rarely written Portia, was a plebeian family at ancient Rome. The gens Portia produced 3 consuls in the 3rd century BC, one of whom, Lucius Porcius Cato, was the father of the famous Cato the Younger. As with other prominent Roman families, several members of the gens bore the name Porcius Cato, so it can be hard to keep them straight. To avoid confusion, I'll refer to them as young Cato and old Cato to distinguish between them. We'll also refer to Cato the Younger simply as Cato. We don't have much information about the gens Porcia before the 4th century BC. According to Livy, the family claimed to descend from a mythical Porcius, who was allegedly Brutus's brother. But that's almost certainly a myth, since we have no evidence for it. What we do know is that they were an old plebeian family, first gaining prominence during the late Republic. Like most of their fellow plebeians, we first meet the Portii during the struggle between the populars and optimate factions in the late 2nd century BC. On one side was Gaius Porcius Cato, who became consul in 194 BC and went on to become censor in 186 BC. This would normally have been a censor's duty to crack down on morals and manners in Rome. But instead, he let the people have their fling while he cracked down on the wealthier class. As Plutarch tells it, he made an example of Marcus Junius Brutus by publicly shaming him for his extravagance. While other censors had banned chariots because they polluted the streets, Brutus had ignored this and driven a team of elephants into the forum to crush a rival's property. So Cato seized his property, sold it and put the proceeds into the public treasury. He then put up posters around the city reading, "Marcus Junius Brutus, son of Marcus Junius, owes the Roman people." And he chained the disgraced man's chariot to the rostra in the forum. Cato was an enemy of Gaius Gracchus, who was trying to reform Roman politics and society. In 123 BC, when Gracchus and his supporters were occupying the capital to try and pass land reform, Cato was among those sent to drive them out. But Cato wasn't in favor of returning land to the poor. Instead, he supported the wealthier class. His main goal was stopping the growing power of the populars, a faction of wealthy landowners and merchants who pushed for political reform and economic and social justice. He had opposed Tiberius Gracchus when he tried to pass similar reforms, but Tiberius had used his tribunate to get around the opposition. So now that Tiberius was dead, Cato and his fellow opponents were ready to fight back. But Gracchus's brother Gaius was elected tribune for 123 and was pushing ahead with the reforms despite the opposition. When the vote for land reform came before the assembly, Cato shouted Carthage must be destroyed, hoping that the crowd would be distracted and miss what he was doing. He cast his ballot in favor of the reform and then immediately left Italy to take up his post as proconsul in Macedonia. It was there that he died in 114 BC. While Cato was away, his colleague as consul in 194 BC, Lucius Aelius Tubero, continued the war against Perseus, king of Macedon. After winning a few small battles against the Macedonian cavalry, the Romans decided to invade Greece itself. But on the way, Tubero fell ill and died. Cato returned to Rome in 115 BC to take over. The next year, he defeated Perseus decisively at the Battle of Pydna. And although he celebrated his triumph in Rome in 112 BC, his health had suffered in the field and he died in 111. A generation later, another Porcius Cato was born in 95 BC. He grew up to become the great Stoic philosopher Cato the Younger. His father, Lucius Porcius Cato, was a military tribune under the future dictator Sulla. He served in the social war against Rome's Italian allies and even rescued the dictator's son from captivity. But he ended up dying in the war. His mother was Portia, daughter of Cato the censor, and she helped raise her son to be a good Stoic. Cato grew up to be a great orator, statesman, and philosopher. He was renowned for his personal integrity, his incorruptibility, and his commitment to duty. He was elected quaestor at 25, aedile at 32, praetor at 37, and finally consul at 40. He gained a reputation for honesty and fairness, working hard to bring order to the chaotic state of affairs after Sulla's dictatorship. But he was also willing to stand up for the rights of the common people against the wealthy class. He prosecuted Verres for extortion as governor of Sicily, won the prosecution, and was awarded the crown of triumph for it. In 78 BC, he campaigned in Asia Minor against the forces of the former Roman ally Nicomedes II. He treated the locals well, unlike many of his fellow Romans, and was rewarded by being deified by the people of Sardis. But the Senate took the province away from him to give to his political enemy, Lucullus, which led to a scandal. Since only a full-blown war could interrupt a province's peaceful transfer like that, the Senate suspected that Cato had made up some excuse to go to war and annex the province for himself. Cato realized that he couldn't convince the Senate of his innocence without starting a civil war. So he resigned and withdrew to Athens. There he lived a quiet life writing books and teaching philosophy until he died in 43 BC. But not all the Portii were honorable men. One of them, Titus Porcius, worked as a gladiator in the late 2nd century BC, and he earned such a reputation for skill and ferocity that he was nicknamed the Roman. In 183 BC, he fought in a famous battle against a group of gladiators from Thrace. They came out of the gate swinging their long swords, but he parried their attacks and cut them down one by one. In the end, he slew all 6 Thracians and won the crown for his master. There was also a gens Portia from Bithynia. They descended from Attalus III, king of Pergamon, and were related to the royal family of Bithynia. Their most famous member was probably Quintus Porcius Cato, who was adopted into the gens Caia and became the famous Roman general Gaius Marius. In the early 1st century BC, the gens Portia produced 2 men who played important roles in Cleopatra's court. One was Porcius Socius, a former slave who earned his freedom and rose through the ranks to become a respected Roman knight. He was appointed to oversee taxes and customs in Alexandria, and his record was so clean that he was given more and more responsibility until he became the agent for the entire eastern provinces. When Octavian came to Alexandria in 40 BC, he was impressed with how well the city was run and attributed it to Socius's honest administration. Another member of the gens Portia was Cornelius Gallus, who rose to become prefect of Egypt. He was one of the very first imperial governors appointed by Augustus, and he oversaw the construction of the famous lighthouse at Alexandria. But he didn't stick around long, because he soon went on campaign against the Garamantes in Africa. It was here that he met his end. But as the exact circumstances are unknown, we don't know if he was killed in battle or died of illness, old age, or something else. But he did die far from home, and his head was cut off and taken back to Alexandria as proof that he was dead. Also in the 1st century BC, a senator named Titus Porcius was involved in the Catilinarian conspiracy against Rome, the failed plot led by the senator Lucius Sergius Catilina. But unlike most of its participants, he wasn't executed. Instead, Cicero wrote that he was exiled. And indeed, we find him 10 years later on the staff of Antony and Cleopatra, where he became a close advisor to the Egyptian queen. When Octavian and Mark Antony divided the Roman world between them, Socius stayed in Egypt, but Porcius went with Antony on his campaign to Gaul. In 32 BC, he was sent ahead to escort the Sibyls to the camp. These were priestesses who supposedly predicted the future, and they were to serve as a good omen for Antony's campaign. But just as he arrived at camp, word came that the Roman fleet had been defeated at Actium, ending the war. He stayed with Antony during the siege of the port city of Brundisium and went with him to Alexandria when the city fell. There he tried to persuade Cleopatra that they should flee to India rather than commit suicide, but she refused. So he killed himself. This ended the gens Porcia's run of prominence, but not their connection to the Egyptian royal family. For the last member we're going to discuss was the beautiful Iris, who was Cleopatra's handmaid and one of her lovers. She's famous for her role in Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, where she's portrayed as Cleopatra's equal in wit and intelligence. But her depiction in Shakespeare's play is heavily influenced by Plutarch's biography of Antony, who paints Iris in a very negative light. According to Plutarch, she was Cleopatra's confidant and chief advisor and helped govern Egypt. But she was entirely self-serving, always trying to advance her own interests and those of her sister. When the sisters weren't around, she hated being alone with Cleopatra, suspecting that the queen might get jealous and have her killed. So she always brought along one of her maids as a buffer. But Plutarch claims that the real reason was that Iras was in love with Enobarbus, Antony's chief officer, and she wanted to be as close to him as possible. When Enobarbus was killed in battle, she grieved for him deeply, and when Cleopatra found out, she grew suspicious of Iras. She accused her of conspiring with Octavian to kill her, and Iras admitted that she had written letters to Octavian, but denied that they were treasonous. The queen decided to forgive her, but banished her from the court. Iras never forgave her, though, and eventually she convinced Cleopatra to make peace with Octavian, thinking that she could rule Egypt alongside the future Augustus. But when the time came for her to leave, Cleopatra broke down in tears and begged her to stay, proving that Iras's theories about her were wrong. Unfortunately, Iras was already on her way to Rome and there was no turning back. Her story ended sadly, according to Plutarch, when she had to watch the triumphal procession of Cleopatra's delegation to Rome, knowing that she wasn't part of it. Then when she got to Rome, she couldn't handle the jealousy of having one of Cleopatra's ladies-in-waiting nearby, so she killed herself. And that's the end of our story about the gens Portia. If you enjoyed this episode, please show your support. And as always, thanks for watching.